and welcome to Trialogue again. My name is Ruth White and I'll be your host this evening. I'm going to invite our three panellists to introduce themselves, and if we could go to Alan first, please.
Good evening, good afternoon and good morning, depending on when you're listening to this. I'm Alan Yates. Some of you may know me as the General Assembly moderator from 2016 to 2018. I am at present the convener of the Education and Learning Committee and also the leader of a task group to help the URC to decide their response to the Legacies of Slavery work that is being undertaken through CWM, the Council for World Mission. Thank you.
Patricia.
Hiya, my name's Patricia Colley and I am a member of High Cross Church in Tottenham. I've had experience with youth work within the church and out of it, and I work within the arts, and I'm drawn towards work that is participation based and anyone could get involved in.
Thank you. Zadie.
Hi, good evening everyone, and it's good to be here with you. I am a ordained minister and I work in Sheffield. In Sheffield, we have team ministry, so there are another 2 ministers along with myself, and we support 9 churches. I'm also currently the coordinator for racial and intercultural ministries in the Yorkshire Synod.
Fabulous, thank you. Well, thank you to the 3 of you for being here this evening to engage with each other in conversation and to just help us to think through this subject a little bit deeper and a little bit more. So we have 3 panelists, 3 potential opinions and 1 topic. We're going to enjoy a short time together. We'll explore with each other and learn from each other as we talk. And we do hope that you will be encouraged and challenged by this conversation, whether you're joining us live tonight or watching later in the week and months to come. So let's just pray before we begin. Father God, we are your children, created by you. We are one people, equal in your sight. But Father, we don't always live in this way. We are discriminatory. We are judging. And we have hurt others because we saw them as less than us. Father, help us tonight to talk openly and honestly, to be gentle in our attitudes and our words as we strive to put things right. Amen.
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 So we're going to be, we normally use a Bible passage to launch our thinking and our chat. And so tonight we're going to be thinking about, as Alan referred to, Legacies of Slavery. And we're going to be using the book of Philemon. So just to give you a summary of that book, Philemon was a Christian who owned a slave called Onesimus. Now Onesimus had run away, and somehow he comes into contact with Paul, who is in prison. And Onesimus becomes a Christian whilst with Paul. Paul then writes a letter to his owner Philemon, saying that he's sending Onesimus back to him, and he asks Philemon to forgive him, saying that he will pay anything that he owes. He also finishes the letter by urging Philemon to welcome Onesimus back, not as a slave, but as a brother in the faith. It's a very short book. It's just a short letter. And I'm sure that my panelists tonight can add further to the summary of Philemon. I hope I did okay with that summary. Don't forget, you can join in with this conversation. It's your conversation. So send in your comments and your questions for the panel via Slido, which should be along the bottom of the screen now. And just for further knowledge, we have a Facebook page now, and please do send in on that Facebook page in the week comments, questions for the trialogue that's coming. and give us your ideas for what further topics do you want explored. So, without further ado, let's get started. The panel was sent 3 questions to get them thinking. I'm going to take the first question, which is, what are the most important parts of the passage that teach us about our response to slavery? And we're going to go to Alan first, please.
If you'd asked me this question 5 years ago, I would probably have given a different answer. Because in 2016, I was invited by the Council of World Mission to join the initial part of their investigation into the legacies of slavery. And I think if you read this passage with some understanding of slavery, using transatlantic slavery as an example, as your lens to look at this, I think it is somewhat different than if you look at it particularly as a white man brought up in a white church. Because the first thing that I think that strikes you, if I look at it with my own lens, is one of, wasn't Paul really showing a Christian response? Paul was treating Onesimus as a real gifted human being, valued in a whole host of ways. It's interesting that I think in Greek, Onesimus means profitable. Now the point that I think Onesimus was named profitable was not because he was valued as a human being. He was valued as a slave. So the first thing I think that strikes you is how generous and Christian spirited and Christ-like Paul was being in being willing to treat Onesimus as a human being like himself, as he was, but also then generously offering to buy him out of slavery. And I think that might give us a warm feeling, and actually give us some encouragement about some of the things that we need to continue today. However, the backdrop to this, I was astounded to read that the Roman Empire had something like 60 million slaves. And of course, Paul was brought up under a Roman Empire that thrived and survived because of 60 million slaves. So the second thing that strikes me, particularly if you look at a lens having some, even a limited understanding of, as I've got, of the legacies of slavery, is, for goodness sake, Paul, that's a wrong issue, isn't it? I mean, yes, it's really nice to be kind to Onesimus, but what about the 60 million others? So I could say more, but I'll stop at this point.
Thank you. Patricia.
I think what is important about this passage and our response to slavery is the different layers that are included in this story, and that we sort of have to peel apart, and how that reflects on the different histories of the countries that we're in and the societies that we exist within. Because, as Alan's just said, how the Roman society couldn't have existed without that in place. It was the cog, an essential cog in the wheel. So being able to unpack that and put that on top of, I think it just drives home the fact that we have to be just aware of how our societies were constructed, and some of the big organizations or like the politics or laws, they also have these structures woven into them. So it just, I think it's a reminder of us to beware and to look at things with many lenses. I think for me, that was my takeaway.
Thank you. Lady.
I would agree with Alan in the sense of not reading necessarily the Bible from a Western perspective, but actually just looking at it in its different context. I think initially when you look at this book, you think, isn't Paul loving and kind? But in fact, if you dig deeper and look at what the story is being sort of told in this letter, I think for me, one of the things that leaps out immediately is Paul missed a chance to actually use the word emancipation. He sort of said, I'm sending him back to you and I want you to treat him as a brother. But he never uses the word free and never mentions freedom. And that's really the different lenses that Patricia's mentioned, and obviously the different layers that Alan's talking about, in the sense that in Paul's time, if he had used those words, it would have been revolutionary, because our society was constructed then on slavery. So if this was written around the time of the transatlantic slavery, I am hoping that Paul's response would be entirely different. Because for me, reading the Bible as a Black woman, what I saw in this particular story, and just to say it's one of my favorite letters, is that I saw what has happened in all the different types of slavery that we've had in our society. We've had conversion, we've had assimilation, this whole thing about payback. I love the way Paul says, and oh, by the way, if he's cost you anything, then I'll pay, which is very similar to the story of the Good Samaritan. So there are a number of links there that we can make, but just to say, for me, I think what we would have liked from this passage would Paul saying freedom, and he didn't.
Yeah, and in this Bible, after Paul offers to repay, in brackets it says, and I want to remind you, Philemon, that you actually owe me your very self, which I found quite fascinating. I'd like to open that one up. And there's a question come in from our viewers already that I think we should address at this point. So it says, why are we spending so much time talking about the legacy or history of slavery when there's still so many people enslaved today? Have some thinking time.
Do you mind if I start with that one? Because one of the reasons why I accepted the invitation from CWM to start thinking about the legacies of slavery was because of all of the modern day slavery that was going on. It was a big issue to me, and it causes me great pain. When I got into the hearings, they specifically weren't talking about modern day slavery. And I felt a little disappointed at the time. But it became very evident that talking about the legacies of slavery, we're not talking about history. The legacies of slavery live on today. And I think that's the issue. If we were simply looking back and being penitent for the atrocities that white people committed in the 15th, 16th, and 17th, 18th centuries, then that would be okay and worthwhile, but it would be of limited value. Today, we still have whiteness, white privilege as a huge issue. We have deprivation of Black peoples around the world, and even in a rich country like ours, that deprivation still continues, and there have been little attempts to give any honest apology, a costly apology. So that's our focus for Legacies of Slavery. It's actually not about, it's not simply about the history, although it has some elements of that. You need to understand the history, but it is about what is here today that needs to be eradicated.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Zadie.
And just really to say that it is important for us to explore our histories, to talk about our histories, because as the saying goes, you will only know where you're going if you know where you've been. And I think it is important for us to just explore, open up, perhaps some of the issues about slavery in the past, in a recognition, as Alan's just said, really, that we're aware that sadly in our world today, there is as much slavery as there was back then. It's a different form, it's much more hidden, and it creeps into our society without us realizing it. But it's important that we recognize the past, because the past will help us not to make the mistakes of the future. And so we can actually understand better the actions we need to take. So is it an apology? Is it reparations? Is this about, making sure that in our communities there is justice for all? So all of those things come with looking back at our history, but also helping us to plan to ensure that we don't repeat the actions of the past.
Yeah. Patricia, do you want to come in at that point?
Oh, I feel like, sorry, I felt like I knew exactly what I was going to say. And then Zadie and Alex spoke, and I was like, yeah.
Trialogue has a habit of doing that.
I think the context that the different, the question was, why are we spending so much time on the legacies and history when there's so much modern day slavery going on today? It's at what point did slavery end? Because we all know that slavery didn't end at the dates that, laws were signed and people tick boxes. It was entrenched. And then when slavery ended, when countries gained their independence, what did that mean? And how are they still tied to countries who are, some of them still to this day, still asking them to pay for their own freedom? So it's not history. Some people are living with the effects, and those effects have grown and molded into modern day slavery. So if we decide not to pursue, or decide, it's been a while, we don't have to concentrate on that. I agree with Zadie. Some things can happen again if we do not confront these issues about all of our mixed past. How on earth are we gonna understand and try to unpack what goes on in the future? So I think they sort of have to go together, really.
We've actually had another question in. Now we always wrestle a little bit as a team that plans Trialogue with which passage should we choose for each theme. And I can't actually remember what brought us to Philemon, but we have an individual asking, how can we use the Bible to heal the wrongdoings done by the empire through white Christians, considering the limitations to this passage, as Zadie so articulately pointed out, and considering the normality of slavery in the Bible as a whole. Do you want me to read that again? Because it's really long.
Yes, please.
So, how can we use the Bible to heal the wrongdoings done by empire through white Christians, considering the limitations to this passage, as Zadie pointed out, and considering the normality of slavery in the Bible as a whole? So it sounds to me like this individual is saying, look, there's slavery throughout the Bible.
And there is.
And there is, yeah. we're not denying that. And so how can we use a book that's full of it to address the issue? I guess is what this individual is asking. Zadie, come.
Yeah. There is no easy answer to that question, because actually, while Patricia was talking, what came to mind was that real sense of us looking at this passage and just thinking that our societies were built on slavery. But what actually came to mind was actually the Egyptians holding the Israelites as slaves and getting them to build buildings and, you know, to work really hard. And one of the things for them now as Jewish people or people of Israel, they always remember those days in slavery, so that, you know, it's something for them to mark that they're hopefully not going to get back to that. They can actually move on. Now, I think this question is absolutely amazing, because it's really spot on. And I would like to suggest that we don't throw the Bible out with the bathwater, if that's okay, because it is full of slavery. There's lots of references like our passage here this evening. And also the fact that our most important person in the Bible, particularly in the New Testament, is Jesus. And equally like Paul, he didn't make any overarching statements about slavery being abolished or anything. So it's a real challenge for us as Christians. So I think it is important that we keep the Bible, because we have the life of Jesus, who has come to change the laws and to introduce through his love, the love then that we should show. So in essence, slavery built on the 10 Commandments, we move into our time with Christ, where Jesus says to us, yes, obey the first commandment, which is to love your God with all your heart. But actually, I'm going to add something to that. And I want you to love your neighbor as yourself. And it's important that we remember those aspects of the Bible and read the Bible through the lens of Christ, through the lens of love, and through the lens of caring and seeing each one of us as equals, rather than a historical document that picks up on challenges that we still face today.
Thank you, Zadie. Any thoughts from anybody else at this point?
Yes, I certainly wouldn't throw the Bible out.
We're agreeing on that one.
and it's clear, even Paul in some of his letters is actually saying, slaves, obey your masters, even if they're hurting you or punishing you, you have to obey your masters. But you, in a sense, you've got to recognize the context that this was written in, that as a Roman citizen, he was used to and understood that the construct around the use of slaves. These writers were human, and they were, in some ways, as imperfect as we are today. And understand the context that they're coming from, I think, is a great starting point. But then to say they were striving to be like Jesus and failing, as in the sense I am today as well, but recognize that Jesus' message was very simple. Yeah, I mean, we can complicate it as much as you want, but love your neighbor as yourself. And then what did Christ go and do? Give an example of a neighbor who the people he was talking to would see that neighbor as only fit for using as fuel in the fires of hell. But he was saying, that's your neighbor. Love them as you love yourself. So, if we do throw the Bible out, we really do throw the baby out with the bathwater, because that message of Christ is the one that I think Paul was trying to live up to, and probably doing a better job than I am. But he comes with the limitations of the environment that he was brought up in, and I think you have to recognize that, but still you know, my belief in Jesus is unshaken by another man telling me to that slaves are useful products.
No. Patricia, I don't want to move on without giving you a...
I don't think I can articulate it at this moment. I still think I'm unpacking that question. That was a lot of a question. So whoever sent that, that's a good one.
Thank you. Again, another question that's come in. So apart from writing an apology, what should the URC do in response to Black Lives Matter and Legacies of Slavery? Have we written an apology, Alan?
The answer is yes. I have a copy of an apology, of a text of an apology, and that was part of the Legacies of Slavery paper that was presented to Mission Council, I think in November last year, but only as an example. I am very keen that if we make an apology, it is not just a simple apology and then we turn on and continue the way we were. You know, Dietrich Bonhoeffer's costly grace comes to my mind. If the apology is not a costly apology, then don't bother. Some other churches have made apologies, and actually then the comment has come back, so what's changed? So to me, apology and some form of reparation, some restorative justice, I think if we cannot agree on both of those things, I'd rather our church did nothing. Now, the third thing, which is in a sense separate, part of it, but separate from those two, is to have a much deeper understanding of white privilege within the church and the society. And we have a number of theologians actually helping us try and think through white privilege. In some ways, that's going to be the most difficult task, because I'm not sure, as I didn't when I first heard that phrase, I'm not sure many people quite understand what white privilege is about. Well, sorry, I'm not sure many white people understand. I think most Black people understand it because it's probably literally hit them in the face, but I'm not sure every white person understands it. So that's the third thing that's on our target. So we are thinking about an apology, but an apology is not straightforward, because if we're going to make it from a denominational point of view, I have two fantastic ladies, well, there are three fantastic ladies, but two of them are Black on this in this panel. And if we make one from the denominational point of view, is Patricia and Zadie apologizing for the excesses that white people have done in slavery? So we have to be quite careful. The language is important. So we are working on that. We are thinking about, so how do we make amends in some ways? And we put forward some suggestions, but thirdly, and as important, if not more important, is we're getting people to try and think through, what does white privilege mean? How do we eradicate it from the United Reformed Church, because it exists in the United Reformed Church? And if we do succeed in doing that, how do we use ourselves as examples to eradicate it in the rest of our society?
Gosh, it's a massive task. Okay, Patricia or Zadie, would you like to come in on that one? Apart from writing an apology, what should the URC be doing? That might be as an organisation, it might be at synod or local church level, or it might be individuals within the URC. What should we be doing in response to the legacies of slavery and Black Lives Matter?
For me, I would agree with the four areas that Alan's just listed, that we can begin to start the work. I think the other bit of work that we would need our theologians also to be looking at is what the previous person who asked the question is, to have us look at the Bible, look at our theology, and what the Bible is actually sort of saying to us around issues about Black Lives Matters, actually to use those lens and the legacy of slavery lens to look at the Bible. I think most importantly as well, and I'm not suggesting that education is the only thing, but I think education is an important part of whatever actions we take forward. So once the apology is written, we can educate people about the wording and how important that is, reparation or whatever we decide to do, restorative justice, all of that. They shouldn't be done just as what ministers do or what our leaders in the church do. I think every single member of the URC needs to know that this work is happening and what it means for us as a denomination. So I think education, is also quite important. And I think we also need some people within the denomination to begin to help to, through that education, to change people's hearts and minds and attitudes. And I think only then we will begin to be able to see a difference that will then impact on the wider community.
Yeah. Thank you. As a children and youth development officer in the URC, I would be intrigued to see how the education works and what that looks like, and what can we do from our lowest age group. Today we're just speaking with 16 to 26-year-olds ish is what we're aiming this at, which is a good age to start thinking about, but we need to go younger.
Yeah.
Patricia, would you like to add to that? I agree that education should in some way be involved. The formatting of it, I'm not sure. I also think that the sharing of stories is something that is very powerful, and that I don't know, something about storytelling, story sharing. Because if people are not recognizing people on one level, when you start to talk and share, they might understand each other on a different level. So I think there's something around that needs to happen for people to become something that facilitates openness. So I'm not sure what form that takes. Sorry, I can't be more succinct.
No, I was thinking exactly the same. Stories are powerful. We don't leave enough time in our programs to share stories. Another question that's come in is, so what is the legacy of slavery in the URC? These are not simple questions. No, they're huge. So perhaps I should add briefly, what is the legacy of slavery in the URC? Who would like to make a start on that one?
I will, but it'll be short. I don't. It's not only the legacy of slavery. It's also the legacy of colonialism and the legacy of it's empire, especially. It's yeah. That's my answer. I'm sorry, that is such a big. That's a big one.
That's fine. Thanks.
Oh Lord.
Sadie or Alan, what do you think the legacy of slavery is in the URC?
I think I was about to say, I think I should let Alan answer that one, but I won't. I wouldn't do that to you, Alan. I think there are a number of things actually around us, and I learned of one when I was at college, because when you're at college you get grants and stuff as you're doing your theological training, and when you look into the history of where those grants have come from, you realize
stop.
So I'm not, that is just one that I'm willing to mention. And the second one obviously has to be some of our buildings. We look around us and we think, if, as we've just talked about, slaves were property, and property money, investments, and all of those things. That's another reason probably why Paul didn't use the word freedom. It's because he would have just collapsed the whole economic system. But anyway, we just need to look around us at some of our buildings.
Can I chime in? Like, I remember I used to go to school around Euston, and there was lots of museums and stuff like that around. So sometimes I'll just find myself wandering around central London and just looking at the buildings and looking at the inscriptions and looking at the gold gilding on some of them. I'm like, where did they get that gold from? Is it my gold? Did they still, was it our gold? Did they, sorry. And then, and the acquisition of things in museums and, it's so crazy. I mean, when you look at definitely, I agree with Zadie about how these big institutions that we're looking at, when you peel back the layers, what about tea? What about sugar? What about spice? Those things drove slavery, those simple things. And it's still mind-boggling now. Those wars over sugar and tea.
I know some of these things are mentioned in the paper that was going to go to Mission Council, or that did go to Mission Council, Alan. I remember reading names in there of people in the URC who owned plantations, and so I think work has begun, hasn't it, to unpeel layers?
It has begun. I mean, some of the obvious ones. So a legacy that is still a financial legacy that is still here today is a one that's used for providing bursaries for educating ordinands and ministers. And I did have a conversation with the trustees for that, and said perhaps there is an alternative use for that money. Should it be returned? And you then get the questions of, so who's it returned to, how is it returned, and then the crunch comes with that particular. Well, there are two funds that are both driven by a will from an individual, and the only way of changing the outcome of that will is through a very expensive legal process. However, I was warmed by the attitude of the trustees for one of the funds, who said, we have opened up this fund to our partner churches in Jamaica and Guyana, and we are open to any number of invitations for access to this fund. So that I think was fine. Perhaps not. I think it was okay. To do anything different, I think we'd have squandered most of that fund in legal fees. Right. That's part of the difficulty. That needs to be a bit pragmatic. In a sense, I am more worried by the true legacy of slavery that has been left. When you go back to the Roman Empire or empires before that, slavery was one person of a similar race against another person of a similar race. These were not necessarily, there might be different tribes or different people from different populations, but they were always very, very close together. What happened in transatlantic slavery, I think, was very different, because the white people used a justification of the color of the slaves to justify why they should be slaves and we shouldn't. And so this idea of whiteness came in, and the true legacy is actually one of racism.
Yeah.
And the thing that it's actually really awkward and difficult to say, but I would guess, including myself, most white people have racist tendencies.
Yeah.
Now, to be honest, I don't know how you can avoid that, given that we're brought up I was brought up in very ordinary circumstances. When you're brought up in a situation where white privilege isn't spoken about, but it just is a matter of fact. You know, that's what you're brought up in, the same way that Paul was brought up in an environment where slavery was a matter of fact. We're brought up in an environment where white privilege is a matter of fact. And the white privilege is a polite way of saying racism. That's the other side of the same coin. And I think that's the true legacy. Does it exist in the United Reformed Church? Well, I'm a white man. I have racist tendencies. I'm in the URC.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
That's the legacy we need to address.
And I think, as Zadie said earlier, education could have quite a big part to play in that. And Patricia, this idea of telling stories and having your heart changed by storytelling. Stories are powerful.
Sorry, but even as I'm saying that, I remember because I was part of a panel last week, but even that process of sharing stories, it can be traumatizing for people to have to tell and retell their stories or share, so there has to be even a caretaking element to that as well. Because and I sort of love the websites that would pop up in response to Black Lives Matter. What do I read? And it would be don't immediately run to your Black friend and ask them to explain it for you, because that's not how it works. Don't ask people to traumatize themselves to tell you what to help you to understand something. You should go on the journey of making yourself uncomfortable, and knowing that the things around you are not necessarily as you see them, so that you can start your own journey, so that you can meet people on a level of being like, if you want to share, I'm in a place where I feel like I can understand a bit better. So I don't know, it's so
that's helpful, actually.
Convoluted.
We recently had Ron Buford, who is a minister in America. He was on one of our panels recently. The URC youth know him well. He spoke at Youth Assembly many years ago. He's a prophet. And he runs an organisation called Racists Anonymous. And it's for everyone is expected to attend, basically. And the course takes you through everything we've been saying, and it's aimed at everybody realizing that you are racist. Absolutely fascinating project. I'd love to see it come over. And it's worth exploring, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'd like to know more about that.
We do like a good course. It eases the blow. Okay, so I'm looking at the time. We've only dealt with our first question. But the important thing is that this is the young people's program. And so any questions we get in, we will always prioritize those questions. So I want to, if I can, ask you, do you feel that you have answered what you felt the most difficult or challenging parts were from Philemon for Christians? Because if you feel we've covered that, we can move on to the third question.
No.
Feel free to tackle it, Patricia.
Okay. Yeah, I feel that Ellen touched upon it, as in the meaning of Onesimus's name sort of translated to profitable, but my version over here, his name translates to useless. Useful or useless, and then he plays on that in his explanation, and that one, it sort of also brought in the layers of the removal of names, because I know from my mum's people, Elway, each name has a meaning, and I'm sure all people, their names have meanings, their names have power, and the having a name stripped from you and then having a new name reapplied, and how people were torn apart and mingled so that they couldn't understand each other's languages. And there are still hundreds of people who will never know the original family names or have the names of former slave owners or plantations. And that really, yeah, that was the part of the reading that just made me pause for a while, because yeah that was heavy. Definitely.
Could I just pick up on that with Patricia, because I had an experience when with CWM I went to Alabama, and we went to a museum in Montgomery where the nickname is called the National Lynching Museum, and it's it doesn't sound like a wonderful place to be there, but and in some ways it isn't, but it is a demonstration and a monument to the atrocities that have gone on in lynching. Now, the place has a 6-foot rectangular cuboid box, 6 foot long, that looks a bit like a coffin. It's made out of mild steel, and it's hung from the ceiling by a single rope at the top. So it's hung longitudinally. So it looks like there's a coffin being hung. Now, there's one for every single county in the United States that had a lynching. And then on each of these coffins, and there are over 400 of them, I think, in there, they then have the names of the people who were lynched. So as I went round with ever more sadness in my heart, reading those names, I was just absolutely stunned that they were English and Scottish names, every single one of them, and it actually tore my heart out in the end. I broke down. I couldn't, and it was not just their lives had been removed, but their names and their identities had been removed. And if ever you get the chance to go to that monument in Montgomery, take a tissue with you, but it's worth going.
Thank you, Alan. Sadie, I don't want to move us on unless.
No, I just wanted to thank Patricia for mentioning the renaming, because that's actually it's fascinating that obviously the Hebrew and the Greek writers felt it was important for us to know the different meanings of Onesimus's name. But it's quite fascinating because we still do that now, like in Catholic tradition, when you get baptized, because once Onesimus ran off and then bumped into Paul in prison, it's like, oh, hello. And then, of course, you would have then had, sorry about the interruption, you would have then had Onesimus being a totally different person with a new name. And he didn't have a new name, which I thought was really quite an interesting thing for me. So thank you for raising that, Patricia. Yes.
Thank you. Our final question then, to round our conversation up. We could speak 3 times over, I think, the length of this programme. So I think this is definitely something we need to revisit in Trialogue. So to the viewers, I would say, what more do you think we need to be talking about with this theme? What are your questions that are remaining? All of these, do send those comments in on the Facebook page, because we will use your comments and what you're wrestling with to form what Trialogue tries to explore. We don't say that we'll come to conclusions, but it's good to talk about things, isn't it? So, final question then to each of you. Could you give us an example, perhaps? Let's leave it on a slightly lighter note. Where do we see the church living out the themes that we've been talking about, or that this passage speaks about? Where do we see the church living this out? Zadie, can I come to you?
I think right across the whole denomination, various churches are living out all the things really that we've picked out this evening, particularly hospitality, caring for refugees, dealing with poverty, and all of those issues. But I think one of the piece of work which, in particular in Yorkshire here, we are working across the Northern Synods, looking at the work of reconciliation, and that might be something that we will want to consider, because I know we don't know the end of the story, and we're quickly running out of time. We don't know the end of the story, so Onesimus gets back, and the question is, does Philemon actually take him back? Was there reconciliation? So I think that's also another area of work that I think as the church we're doing some work on, which is really, really positive. So mediation and that sort of thing. Excellent.
Thank you, Zadie. Alan.
Well, in some other writings, there was a black bishop called Onesimus. And so there was some speculation as to whether this is the same Onesimus, and there were reason to believe that he is the same person. And so I think that in some ways that's the bit of the story that I'd like us to continue to live out, in that a slave called Profitable ended up to be valuable in a whole host of ways, but also as a symbol of Christ, as a bishop really is meant to be, the embodiment of Christ. So that's the bit I'd like our church to continue to embody.
Fabulous, thank you. Patricia, the last word is yours.
Oh no. I hope, no, oh dear. The last word is mine. I think the way the churches are living out this passage are the ways that they are responding to the earnest, tribulations of the places around them. If they're responding to whatever their community needs the most, this letter was, I feel like, a response of what Onesimus needed the most. And it's true, Paul didn't push forward to speak about emancipation or freedom or anything else. So I think in a sense we have to look at the issues around us and make that extra push, give that extra push. So I feel that's where it should lead to with this letter.
Thank you. Thanks, Patricia. So I guess we leave the viewers with lots to think about tonight, but I want to leave them with a question, if I may, something around, it's not going to be a well-formulated question, but it's something around the need to not be a racist, but to be anti-racist, and to feel uber aware, and to not be, as you were saying, Patricia, too comfortable. Let's make ourselves uncomfortable as we continue to work these things out with each other. And let's, as I think it was Alan said, let's oh no, it was you, Zadie, said it at the beginning. Let's just try our best. It sounds really pithy, but to just love each other genuinely as my sisters and my brothers in Christ. Let's work at it, I guess is the phrase. Not be too precious to have the conversations. So next week is going to be the last trialogue till after the summer, I believe. And they will be exploring Luke 4. So that's when Jesus was in the wilderness. And the theme is having time out. Sounds like a punishment. And it's about having that time to reflect and prepare for the next few months ahead. Phil Ray will be your host, and the panelists include Brandon Stein, Hannah Jones, and Elizabeth Gray King. So all that's left to say is thank you, panelists, for being here tonight and giving your time. Thank you so much for sharing of yourselves within this theme and taking part. And to the viewers, we really hope you've had ears to hear and hearts open. And we hope that that conversation has helped you and challenged you. Remember to send in on Facebook what you would like us to be looking at. That could be a Bible passage or a theme, and we will do our best to work that into the programme coming. So I'm going to ask Patricia if she'd pray for us now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dear Lord, we come to you with all these thoughts and feelings and troubles and confusion. We hold it all up to you and we ask you to help us to unpack them and to help us with our journey, to help us with our patience, our inconvenience, our anger, our sadness. And we ask you to walk with us on those journeys as we learn how to strengthen the communities around us and to remove our biases and prejudices, and so that we can take that step to truly loving our neighbours. We ask you this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
I think we should just say as well to anyone watching that if you have been affected by the conversations tonight, please don't feel that you are on your own. Just reach out tonight or today, whatever day or the week you're watching, and don't be on your own with anything that you may be struggling with. Just reach out, perhaps to your sider or your minister or to a trusted friend. Don't be on your own, okay? All right. Thank you very much, everybody. And until next week or next time, God bless and goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye.